this would, based on the national survey that we did this year with volunteers, the ask was to have a segment around handling the nature of difficult calls, both a difficult caller, but also how we might navigate difficult calls ourselves. And that will lead in then to our session in the afternoon with Tony Bates on making the unbearable bearable. So I'm hoping there will be a lot of insight in that. So for our discussion today, we have Stuart and Jackie. We will have 20 to 25 minutes for that piece. We'll then break into our breakout rooms for 15 minutes or so to discuss the nature of how we handle difficult calls. I'm really hoping that we'll get a sense of some good practices, tips and advice for when we do deal with those calls. And then we'll have, towards the end of that session, 15 or 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So that's the outline for now. So before we get into the business of the day, we have another Vox Pop video series to show you. So if our tech person can roll that, please.
Hello, my name is Eilish O'Carroll, and I would like to congratulate the National LGBT Helpline on a successful 10 years, and to thank all the dedicated volunteers who have provided this frontline critical service and adapted to the COVID era without taking any break in service during the pandemic. For so many of our members in the community, the helpline can be a lifesaver. Just having somebody to talk to and a listening ear can make such a difference to their mental health and well-being. So all that's left to say is you are truly appreciated. You do a fantastic job, and thank you. And here's to another 10 years. Bye.
Great. So that's Eilish O'Carroll. So thank you to all you lifesavers out there. I think she defined it beautifully. So I'm going to hand you over now to Stuart Coleman, who's going to chair the panel this afternoon. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Stephen, and hello, everyone. Welcome back after lunch. Hope you're refreshed and revitalized and ready to go again. And such a lovely, heartfelt message there from Eilish. I think it really shows what a reminder for all of us about why we're here and why we do what we do, to be there for people when they need it, or indeed, as Paula said earlier, to be, for people to know that we're there, so that if they do need us, they can reach out. Just to introduce myself, as Stephen said, I'm Stuart Coleman, so I've been with the helpline for the last 7 years, and for the last 2 years have been the Dublin coordinator for the team of Dublin volunteers, and delighted to have Anne Corcoran from the Samaritans and Jackie Moore from Childline as well on the panel with me today. It's brilliant to have you both, and thank you so much for giving up your time and coming along today. I think just thinking about difficult calls and how we handle them, just thinking about it kind of over the last week, looking back, I think as any volunteer probably does feel, when they start volunteering with the service, every call probably feels like a difficult call. But I think, as you, become more experienced and more seasoned, if you like, in the different scenarios that can come up, you, I suppose, grow to become more comfortable in handling the difficult calls. But I think it's always, and even for any of us, I think it's, no matter how long you're with the helpline, I think it's always a factor of a shift that at any time, a difficult call can come up. And I think for lots of different reasons, for lots of different people, that can be something that, either might, trigger something in them that might make it a difficult call, or also, when you think about the topics we deal with, you're dealing with someone who's very vulnerable, very exposed. They're talking about their sexuality, their gender identity, and maybe how that journey is going with the closest people in their lives. So that can obviously lead to a lot of heavy content at times. So I think it's really great that we have this session today to look at how we deal with those calls, and also as volunteers how we mind ourselves after the call, and make sure we have those kind of supports in place, because I think it's just a good reminder that no matter how long you're doing it or how long you're talking to people on the phone or on chat, you know, we're never, it's always something that can happen, that, you know, a particular call can just hit you, and you know, you need to be aware how to deal with it and how to mind yourself. And I think, as Stephen said as well, I think there is the two aspects to it as well. You've got the difficult calls, but, you know, another a separate but I suppose paralleled scenario is the difficult caller. You know, depending on how they're presenting, how they're engaging, that in itself then can lead to a difficult call, as well as, you know, a caller who is engaging but maybe bringing some heavier topics to discuss. So we might reach out to the panel, and just actually before we do that, I know Paula had put in a message earlier just to remind people on that point to look after themselves, and we'll cover that some of that in this session, and that there may be some heavier topics discussed and examples raised. So just to be aware of that, and, you know, to reach out to your coordinator or some of the helpline staff if you need to after the session. But I might start with Anne, if that's okay. You're first on my screen. You're very welcome to the conference this afternoon. And I might, we might start maybe just with yourself and Jackie, just to maybe briefly outline your own role within your organisations, and you know, the main functions of your organisations today.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of the conference in however small a way I am, but it is an honour to be here, so thank you for that. So I'm a volunteer with the Dublin branch of Samaritans for many years. I don't age myself when I say that. So I've kind of held a lot of roles within the volunteering of Samaritans. I mean, the primary role, and the one that's the most important, of course, is the listening volunteer role. But I've also held roles of being, I suppose, a support to our listening volunteers and training and things like that. So that's I suppose, kind of my history within Samaritans volunteering. I'm also a staff member in Samaritans Ireland. So we have a small team of 8 staff who are there to kind of work with our branches of Samaritans across the whole of the island, just offering support in different ways, like our tech, like the governance, that kind of thing. So my role was very much around partnership, and I'm very happy to say that I met Paula many years ago, I suppose nearly 8 years ago, and that we've had what I believe is a really good partnership with LGBT Ireland, and in terms just of sharing our experiences and sharing information, but also offering out of our support to callers to the LGBT helpline when your line is out of ours. So that's really important, and one that I know Paul and I are very happy that we have there. So so that's kind of me and who I am and what I bring. I suppose the big piece is the volunteering piece, Stuart. So will I stop at the moment and maybe let Paul or let Jackie speak?
Yeah, so I work in Childline. Obviously, everyone knows it, probably is aware of it. So we are the National Listening Service for children. We're run by the ISPCC, which is obviously the Society of Prevention for Cruelty to Children. And as well, I've been working with Childline. I started as a volunteer about 5 years ago, and just fell in love with the service and what we do, and the ethos, and putting the children first, and the protection around that, and really giving a safe space to the children of Ireland to talk about whatever it is in a non-judgmental fashion, and without the fear of being told what they should or shouldn't do. So just a safe place for them to come and chat about whatever is going on for them. And I really fell in love with the service. And then while I was there, a job came up in reception. I got involved in kind of fundraising and all the aspects of the charity, really through working in reception as well. And then just this year in April, after taking a job as working as night staff as well on the Childline listening service for about 2 years, and then in April I took the position as supervisor or coordinator of the volunteers, which I'm really loving at the minute. It was a baptism of fire, obviously, because I started as the lockdown began. So I was meeting most of the volunteers that, like, I'd be aware of a lot of them, or I would have known a lot of them, but a lot of them I have no face. I didn't even know what they looked like. I started meeting and kind of supervising them like this over Skype or over Zoom at first. So yeah, it was kind of a strange one, but but as the service goes, it's just great to be involved in, and like I said, it's just really important for even any children or anyone in Ireland to have that safe space to come and to be heard and to be listened, and to know that we're not going to judge them or tell them what to do or what they should do, just to say, look, this is how you're feeling, okay, what's that like for you, you know?
And I think it's great to have you both here, because you're obviously, you know, offering a very similar service, but to different age groups. So like, it's great to have that, you know, broad spectrum covered. We might get a little, I suppose, deeper into the detail of the session today. Maybe Anne, it would be great to hear from you, from your point of view, in terms of, you know, I suppose what you would maybe, or your organization would understand to be a difficult call, or what would be the types of difficult calls you would get, and then how, you know, you prepare, or you kind of train your volunteers to handle those difficult calls.
Easy question, Stuart, then, yeah?
We'll start off with an easy one, but we work back from there.
Okay, fair enough. And you know, when you started speaking yourself there, Stuart, I had been thinking about this, and you know, in some ways, isn't every call a difficult call? Do you know? And certainly, I think for myself, it's reminding myself that however difficult it might be for me, how much more difficult is it for the person who's picking up the phone to our service, or to your service, or to Childline. You know, we can all acknowledge, I suppose, the courage that it takes for somebody to reach out. And I think we all kind of try to encourage people to pick up the phone and to share what they're going through. But it does take that piece of courage. So, I suppose to start to answer your question, I suppose when we're training our volunteers, you know, I think as Jackie said there too, it's all about the person who's calling the service, and everything is directed to offering the best service that we as Samaritans can offer to that person. So I suppose threaded through all our training is the really, really important need to look after each other. And that is just, I suppose, it's nearly as important as how we look after our callers, how we look after each other. Because if I'm not in a kind of reasonably good state to pick up a phone, I'm actually not going to be particularly good for my caller. So I suppose inherent in all the training, Stuart, is that idea that, you know, we're going into our branch, and we in Samaritans are still physically going into our branches. So you're going in, and it's like you're kind of putting yourself in the Samaritan space, and you know, you're offering what Samaritans offer. And I think for me, I think that's really helpful, because it puts a boundary on what I can and can't do as a volunteer. So even when we're looking at a call that we perceive to be difficult, shall we say, it's kind of the ask of me as a volunteer is to do my best for that caller within the boundary of what I can offer. And I think you mentioned it yourself too, Stuart, that it is reflecting on what's a difficult call, you know. So as you rightly say, and there were things that was going through my mind, what I might find difficult might not be the same for you. So I think there's sort of an ask of us to kind of reflect on the ones that we find difficult, and be it now, you know, to give you examples, we can have, as you say, maybe the very difficult caller that might be maybe a very abusive call. Some of us might find that really hard to handle, or it could be somebody who's, I suppose, to me, actually, my own personal one would somebody with a sense of hopelessness, where their situation might be a very hopeless situation. And of course, somebody who's in a suicidal crisis, they're always going to be really difficult calls. I think, again, for myself, one that I can sometimes find difficult is how to end a call.
Yeah.
You know, where you know that human part of you that wants to give to the caller is finding it difficult then maybe to gently wind that call up. So I always feel there's two aspects to it. There's kind of, you know, obviously our caller who's the person that this is all about, but there's also ourselves and what's going on internally and how we respond to what we're hearing. So one of the key, as I keep saying, the key thing is that sense of support. And for ourselves, and I've no doubt for Jackie and for yourselves, you know, that support we get from each other is vital, you know, and it's the exact same support that I would offer to a caller as I would offer to my fellow volunteer, to allow my volunteer to express the impact that call might have had on them, without judgment or without telling them, well, I had a call like that and this is how I responded. That doesn't matter. It's allowing that same space to happen for our callers. Now, I don't know if I've answered anything for you there, Stuart.
No, you have, absolutely. But I think that's a really important point around how to end a call. Like, that's a really important point, because I was just thinking, like, probably from my own experience and from supporting the volunteers as well, like, probably what I've noticed is probably some of the more difficult calls for that I've kind of supported people on is where, you know, the call hasn't maybe ended well, or in the sense that the caller maybe is still in a lot of turmoil or trauma, and while the volunteer has been brilliant at supporting them and has absolutely given them that space to talk something out, you know, I suppose it's a much nicer scenario when you can, you know, you feel there's a conclusion, or you feel there's a natural kind of end. Whereas if someone, you know, is obviously in trauma and really struggling, you know, you've obviously provided them support, but you, as I suppose as a volunteer, have that sense of, God, are they going to be okay? You know, because obviously you may not, or you probably won't talk to them again, or it could be another volunteer to get the next time. So, you know, I think that is a big thing that occurs, I think, for volunteers, that, you know, they wonder how that person is getting on, or how they're going to be getting on, you know. So I think that's a really important point around, you know, how to kind of handle that scenario, and how to kind of manage that scenario, you know, to wind up that type of call properly, as well as maybe something that comes to a more natural conclusion.
I think that's very true what you say, but I think it's very human that, you know, all of us are there to offer the best of ourselves to the service. So I think it's only human that we'd have that, oh, I hope that person's going to be okay. Yeah. But I do feel too that, you know, and probably it's a steep learning curve, it's trusting yourself that you've done your best and you've brought what you said you'd bring to that person at the end of the phone, that space to talk, that space to be honest about themselves. And I think, you know, my own experience would be that that's sometimes the hardest lesson, to actually trust that being there for a person can be so life-changing without us telling them what to do, or, you know, giving our wonderful advices or whatever it might be. But the value of our presence to another person, I think, is just, you know, so life-affirming. And it's allowing ourselves, I think, sometimes to trust that.
No, that's brilliant, and it is. You forget the impact that has just for that person at that time. Thanks, Anne. Jackie, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience of caller types and
Yeah, I think you hit on a very important point at the beginning, that like a difficult call is so subjective. So like what could be difficult for myself may not be for yourself or for Anne or for anybody else. So I think it is about, and I think Anne touched on that as well, about checking in with yourself and make it, and our job is obviously to check in with the volunteers as well, and as well just to keep hammering on that to them, that even to take a debrief after each call, whether even if in the moment you're not finding it difficult, but even after you end the call or the call ends, just to take a minute with yourself and to see, how am I feeling? What is going on? Am I being triggered? Is there anything else? And just hammer that home with the volunteers as well, that that's very important, that we need to be very self-aware as well, you know, on them. Because like I said, you could, and you might think that you're okay with the call or what's going on, but it might hit you later on, you know, after you've gone home and you've gone off your shift. And then that's, I think, where supervisors or you know the support network around, so to make yourself available and to let them know that, check in, you know, call someone, call your supervisor, talk to someone, talk it out, you know, in whatever way you can, if that makes sense, you know. It's very important. And as Anne touched on as well, boundaries are huge, because we are all in this, we're all working in this industry, or we're all volunteering for the same reason, because we care. And when we care, it's harder to enforce boundaries sometimes, because you're trying to do the best. If that makes sense, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely, it's a really valid point. And I thought, like, within Childline, what supports would you have for volunteers, or how would you support people, you know, who need maybe a debrief after a difficult call? Or
yeah, so we make sure that no volunteer is ever on their own, that there's always at least one other volunteer with them. We have a mentor system as well, so each shift will have one volunteer will be a mentor, which is like a supervisor on the shift as well. So they keep an eye on things and they're feeding all the information back to the supervisors as well. It's nearly like a stepping stone, or a tier of kind of support. So then if the mentor, you know, if that they still need extra support, then definitely they should then contact their supervisors. Supervisors are always available to take that call as much as possible. If we're not, we have what we call managers on call. So we have resilient support workers through the ISPCC as well, who take a roster of being on call. So then again, they step in as well. So that number is always made available to all the volunteers also. And then also within the training, like that, we kind of make sure that everyone is checking in with themselves, that they know I know no one can really know all their triggers, but are aware of themselves, and you know, we make ourselves available to the volunteers as well, through training, and to let them know that, you know, call us for anything, you know, if needs be, you know. That makes sense. So kind of a tier of support around people.
Yeah. And you'd have similar, Anne, would you have similar support in place?
Yeah, very much as Jackie says. Likewise, none of our volunteers are always at least in pairs when we're offering the service. And we will also always have what we would call a leader, who's a volunteer who's there to support the listing volunteers throughout the shift, throughout the night. So they do kind of a full day and a full night shift. So they're there for the volunteers to check in with and debrief for the calls that they've had. So, and that's really, really important. And I suppose since COVID, as I said, our volunteers are going into the branches, but a lot of our leaders are not going in. So the supports are now by phone. So there's more of a sort of an ask that every volunteer deliberately debriefs. And as Jackie said, you mightn't be particularly affected by a call immediately, but it's so important if that maybe hits you later, that you do look for that support. And if it was a case that maybe it was particularly difficult, I mean a really difficult situation for one of our volunteers, we do have what we call a volunteer care team in all our branches, but I'm speaking Dublin branch. So they would they would be checking in with all the volunteers, and if somebody was having a very difficult time, we'd put in extra, I suppose, supports for that volunteer. So as I say, that the whole, like Jackie says, the whole heart of it is that, you know, we're trying to keep ourselves, you know, as resilient as we can in order to provide the service. And, you know, with everything that's going on in the world, like there's nearly a greater ask, isn't there, that we all look after ourselves in order to do this piece of work, this volunteering that we're all doing, you know, because nobody's immune to COVID.
No, actually not. Just before we move into the breakout rooms, we might just talk a little bit more specifically around, I suppose, like within LGBT Ireland and within the helpline, like a lot of the call scenarios, like we would be dealing with would be particularly around people, you know, disclosing their sexuality or their gender identity and the struggles or issues they face around that. So it might be good just to hear a little bit from both of you on, I suppose, the types of, you know, some examples maybe of difficult calls that you deal with, and how, you know, what is a good way to handle them, you know, versus, you know, a call that maybe hasn't gone so well.
You know, the types of calls we get are just so broad across, you know, across the population, if you like. So people will genuinely talk to us about anything. You know, the top, I suppose, 5 types of calls that we would get would be around relationships. So that would be, you know, personal relationships. It would be lack of relationships. It might be work situations. It's kind of about people. So how, you know, how things are going with people. Relationships, depression, as you can imagine, would be high up there. Finance, loneliness has always been a really one of the top 5 there. Okay. But the reality, it's about anything, you know, anything anybody is going through. And I suppose what we'd always say is, you know, there's nothing too small or too big to talk to us about. So somebody engaging with ourselves, you know, obviously we all have our story. And, you know, we present our story. It's sort of to try and help somebody understand where we're coming from. So for ourselves, it's trying to, you know, get to how that story is impacting on your life. How are you coping with that? Yeah. So, you know, we're not like Jackie said, we're not going to tell somebody what to do. And, you know, whereas yourselves at times may have some very good advice and information to share with your callers, we wouldn't be doing that. We'd be very much staying with, you know, the impact of the situation on the person and allowing them to kind of, I suppose, unravel their thoughts, unravel their thinking, and, you know, in the hopes, I suppose, that in doing that, you know, that there might be a sense of, okay, maybe the next step is whatever that might be, or even the value of being able to externalize very difficult feelings and emotions can help any of us, I suppose.
Make them, and I suppose shine a light on those feelings, shine a light on those scenarios to help them kind of explore them a bit more.
Absolutely, you know, it's even just that analogy of, you know, things going around in a washing machine, and if you take them out and you put them into bundles, they're all still there, but sometimes maybe we can see a bit clearer of what might be the bundle we need to look at, or the one we need to hide. Absolutely. So our focus is always on that and on staying with the person, you know. So I suppose the difficult, you know, not everybody engages with the service, as you rightly say, Coleman, or Stuart, we love everybody to get off the phone saying, that's great, I feel better. That doesn't always happen, of course it doesn't. So I suppose, as I say to you, maybe it's the angry caller, and it's trying to stay with the person as they are, you know, and to try to be with them, be it with their anger or their upset or whatever it might be. And in some ways, holding ourselves, our own response to that until we come off the phone, you know, and that's not always easy. So I suppose it's why, you know, we talk so much about looking after ourselves, you know, and I think for me, there's always this sense of every time I go to pick up a phone is nearly kind of centering myself, kind of and taking a deep breath, because you don't know what you're going to hear, and preparing yourself that it could be something.
And you're almost kind of remaining kind of passive, or you're not, you know, to avoid that reaction, obviously, to anything that might come up.
But again, I say it's very important that we have our human reaction when we put down the phone. I think that's really important, that it's not about swallowing it down. It's about trying to make that call for that caller.
Yes.
You know, and giving them what we said we would give them, which is that space and time to talk, you know.
Brilliant.
And,
Thanks.
sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm just looking, we're just coming past 2:30. So what we might do, and that was brilliant, Anne, thanks for that. There's some really good tips in there for people to be aware of. And I think it's really helpful to be reminded of them as well, because you do, you know, you kind of, you can lose sight of that too, just going from shift to shift. So what we might do now is divide out into our breakout rooms, and Anne and Jackie, you'll stay with me here. And what we might just ask people to do is just have a chat amongst yourselves of maybe some of the more difficult calls you've come up against more recently, how you've handled those. And then if you'd come back to us maybe with any questions that you'd like answered, maybe to look at some specifics around, you know, the best way to deal with those calls. Okay. See you soon, guys. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I suppose in this part, we might just take a look at some questions from people in their own groups, and I suppose just to see some outputs from the discussions you've had around, you know, difficult callers, and I suppose maybe questions you'd like to ask our panel, maybe on how to deal with them.
One of the questions from my group actually was around when you receive call, you know, you've done all this preparatory work and training, you're ready to give the listening ear the advice and information, and then it so happens either to be a prank call, or you've spent a few minutes building trust with somebody and it starts morphing into maybe a sex related call, and you're immediately disappointed that all of your work has come down to this. So maybe how to handle that kind of a difficult call when it is kind of more sex related, and it's challenging for a volunteer than when you've done all this work. So that's one from my group.
Brilliant. No, that's a really good question, because it is something we come up against a lot. So I suppose it is, yeah, Anne and Jackie, like it is a scenario that I suppose it's almost like a fantasy type caller where, you know, they would, you know, and sometimes I suppose it can be difficult to identify that at the start of the call as well. So maybe just to look at how, I suppose, how to handle that scenario when it does become apparent, or a good way to deal with it.
I know we have different practices. We call them practices. I'm sure you guys have something similar, but we use what we call the sexualized practice. I was just mentioning it in the group before as well. So if a child or if a caller gets particularly sexualized, or especially if they're targeting it at the caller or the facilitator, you know, in particular, we give them kind of a 3 strikes and you're out kind of rule. So we kind of warn them and say, okay, well, Childline's not here and talk in this kind of fashion or in this way. And what do you think about that? If they continue, they would say, okay, we'll have to give you 3 warnings. So as you mentioned, Childline's not here. So if you try again, or and then, but when we say what we're very strong on as well is, and it's around boundaries too, is if they're using the 3 strikes rule, that when they push the boundary that 3rd time, that we do end the call. Because that's a trust building exercise with them as well, that we're showing them that we do what we say we do. So if that means that if we are doing that in regards to this kind of sexualized call and ending the call when we say we are going to, then they can also trust us to keep their call safe if they're calling for other reasons. And we always, even when we do it, end the call, we do it in a child-centered way, in positive regard, non-judgmental. We just say, not a good time for you to be chatting to Childline at the moment, so we're going to end the call, but you can call back at another time. Still getting unconditional positive regard, They're getting non-judgment as well, but they're knowing, and we're showing a boundary to them to say, no, this is not okay. That makes sense.
No, it is, and I think it's an important point to actually, to show the caller that you're owning the call as well, and that you're in control of the call, and that you're not afraid, if you like, to actually call out what's happening and to bring it to the surface, and actually, I suppose, give them an opportunity then to, maybe correct and maybe no, that's not what's happening, you know what I mean, and give them the chance to say that. But if it is, to actually, as you say, kind of 3 strikes and you're out, like, it's good to actually name it and manage it so that it doesn't become something that they feel they can do on the call.
And again, it can be different. Other facilitators might be like, not that they'd be okay with listening to it, but they might take another route. So they might try and change the subject, or they'll pretend like they don't know what they're talking about, like as in you're making a joke about it, kind of way. I wouldn't say, when I use this word, but like somebody might say, if they said pussy, the person will go, oh, you like cats, do you? Simple things like that, and kind of defer it or try and change the subject with them and disarm them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Jackie. Another question from a group was looking at how can a volunteer maintain compassion and empathy when we can't do any more for somebody, and laid out all the options. So I suppose that's really around where maybe you've explored the different scenarios and options, and where where do you go from there, maybe when they're not willing to engage or willing to maybe look at any of the options, or how can you support them in that type of scenario?
I think, I suppose it comes back a little bit to boundaries, but I think it comes back to, doing what we say we will do in terms of exploring with somebody and, helping them to see their own options. But I think too that the service that we offer is an empowering service. So, we hope that by engaging and by talking, by exploring, that the person will find their next step. So, it's not for us to impose on somebody what they should be doing, rather than try to empower them in their life and in their circumstance to take the next option, or whatever that might be, or to be able to reflect on what's going on. And again, I think it comes back to what I said to you earlier, that for any one of us, when we can feel maybe less than satisfied with how the call went, to remind ourselves that the ask of us is to do our best, to do the best that we can. And I think sometimes when a call ends and we feel like that, and we need to just maybe debrief with each other, to know that, look, I did what I said we do in Samaritans. I was there for the person, I helped them. It is up to, I suppose it's that sense of self-determination. It is up to every one of us then to reflect on what we talked about and to live our lives, So all we can do is help facilitate the thinking of that and the exploration of that.
Yeah. And does it come down to then, like, actually, looking at ending the call, and when is it, that was another question, like, when is it good, when, I suppose, when to know, or how to know when to actually end the call? Like, is it maybe where you have explored all options, and, particularly I think for some reoccurring callers too, that they might have the boundaries up, they mightn't be willing to kind of look at other options, but I suppose you're obviously giving them a certain amount of time, but maybe I suppose it's looking at then how what is a good way then to end that call, or how do you kind of, the best way to end a call in that scenario?
Well, I suppose, there's two pieces. One, if somebody isn't really engaging with our service, well then, I suppose it's hard to do it in the abstract, but I suppose inviting them to, I suppose, is there anything else they wish to kind of explore with us, or whatever it might be. And if there isn't any kind of great response to that, well then maybe the way to gently wind it up would be to say, we've been talking for a while now, so, before we go, you do know we're here. Like for ourselves, we obviously would say we're here 24 hours a day. You know, please call back if you feel you want to avail of our support, that kind of thing. So it's always around, just making sure a person knows that we're here. And I think the other side of ending calls maybe would be somebody who's engaged with us and they just want to keep talking.
Yeah.
And that's not doing them any good, nor ourselves any good. After a certain amount of time, we'll all start to repeat ourselves.
Yeah.
So to remind ourselves that you're not doing harm to a person by gently winding down a call. And, it's not easy. I find it hard myself, to kind of, you don't want to stop somebody in their tracks. And yet, to be able to say, look, if you have somebody's name's Stuart, we've been talking now for a while. So maybe we'll just take a little break to reflect on what we've been talking about. And as you know, we're here. So please do call back. And I think it comes a little bit back to what you say, Stuart, about taking a little bit of control of the call.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So when you need to wind it down, that we take that control and, tell the person that, of course, we're here if they want to call us back. And,
No, I think that is important, for boundaries as well, and to kind of, for volunteers, to kind of mind themselves too, and, that they feel they have that control and that ownership over the call, and that it isn't running away with them either way, whether it's someone who's kind of, abusing the service, or then someone who's really, looking to stay on when maybe it's not appropriate. Another question that came in from one of the other rooms, maybe Jackie, you might look at this, was around tips for remote volunteering. So I think one of the things we've been doing through lockdown and through the last few months in some locations was, I suppose, we were all set up at home, taking calls at home, and one of the things you mentioned earlier about, I suppose, we're missing that contact. Likewise, we'd always have someone on a shift with someone else in the office, so we've missed that remote volunteering, even though there would be maybe two people on a shift. They're obviously not together. So I suppose it'd be good to understand, Jackie, was there any tips from your point of view in terms of remote volunteering and kind of managing, volunteers supporting each other in that scenario?
Yeah, exactly. I would say link them in to who else is on shift with them. Now I know it's a bit tricky because with us, we remained in the office, so we didn't. It's only the supervisors that work remotely, so the volunteers still are going into the office. We've just reconfigured the office so they're socially distanced, and also we put up screens and things like that. And we've lessened the amount of people that are in the unit, say, at one time. So they're still there present. But I know how I make my presence felt to my volunteers when I'm not there with them, is by obviously I'll ring at the beginning of the shift, I'll check in with them, I'll let them know that I'm available to them. I presume it'd be a good idea as well. We have obviously units nationally as well. Recently we brought in, we've changed our phone system to a cloud-based system, so it's like it's online. So it means that it's easier for our volunteers now to see their other units, who's on, how many are in that unit. They can also reach and text those units or those other volunteers through this phone system as well. So which might be a good way to say, if Stuart, you're on shift, and whoever you're on shift at, that even if you're both working from home, that you both know you're on from 4 to 8 or whichever, or 6 to 10, whichever time that that you can reach out or phone each other between calls, and like you're on shift physically together, but obviously apart, if that makes sense.
No, that's really good. Really important.
Yeah.
To look at that as well, because you can maybe get into a bad habit of you're just doing the shift on your own. So it's really, and we're obviously not used to working or to doing shifts in that way, like, so it's really good to kind of look at that.
I know a few of my volunteers, so say if I have a shift of volunteers on 6 to 10 on a Wednesday evening, and they're all really friendly with each other, and they're all in a WhatsApp group
yes
together. you know, so even a group message kind of way, so you don't have to actually physically pick up the phone. You could be texting each other, are you on shift? And it doesn't have to be that you're always talking about the difficult calls or what calls you're having. You could just say, oh, how are you? Or like even jokes going on between each other, if that makes sense, you know.
No, that's great. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
Aisling, I think you had a question to ask the panel.
Yeah. A theme that came up for us, it's probably more a suggestion actually for our own helpline rather than a question, was that at least 3 of us, if not 4, found that we had a lot of cross-dressing queries over the last year, and that you kind of come to the end of the road that there's not really many groups organized or anything for it. So one just open question would be, is it, you know, could we set up a peer support group around that, or maybe there's a bit more information coming? That was a thing that came up for us. Thank you.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Aisling. And I think it is, I've noticed that myself, like even on my own shifts, like it is something that does come up a lot. And I think sometimes it can be callers who may be cross-dressing and may not take that any further. That's, you know, maybe that's as far as they'll take it, and maybe for other people it may go further. But like that can be a particularly difficult call to handle, and to know, you know, how to kind of handle that scenario. And I suppose you're right, like at times you can take it so far, but then you're kind of wondering what to do next, or where to go from there, you know. And is that, would you get any calls of that nature into the Samaritans?
Yeah, we would. Not maybe, I suppose historically we would have gotten more, but yes, we would have. And as you say, it's a difficult enough call because, you know, for ourselves, obviously we want to be there for a person, and you know, you're exploring sort of, you know, the impact of the cross-dressing on that person, you know, how it makes them feel, how it fits into their life, you know, does anybody else know? Is it a secret they hold? And if it is, and I suppose to a large extent, the answer would have been yes, how does that impact on your well-being, you know? And then there's, excuse me, the side that, you know, the I suppose the benefit that the person feels from cross-dressing and just sharing that. And I suppose, again, in my experience, it would be sometimes just to be able to say it out loud to somebody because you can't say it anywhere else. So that was always seemed to be of a value. But yet then there is a point where we've explored that, you know, I see what Aisling was saying, that it comes to a point where what else can we say, you know, depending of course on what way the person shares with you, the impact it's having on them. So it's kind of exploring what's there. But
and then I think sometimes as well, maybe it's about just the person, and I know this can happen too, where say the person is actually dressed and they call a service, and it you know, it might be just about them having someone they can talk to in that scenario, like while they're presenting in that way. So you know, I suppose sometimes it might be just about having a chat with the person, and you know, obviously taking on the points that Anna's made, but like after that it might be just about having a chat with them. Like if there's no, you know, if there's nothing else that has come up in the conversation that you know, leads you elsewhere, like it might be just to kind of have that chat with them and have that conversation with them.
Again, it brings you back then to your own kind of self-awareness, because is that me thinking I should be doing something different for this person? But as you rightly say, maybe they just want to talk, and that's perfectly fine, and share, you know, what their experience in this moment is, and that's okay.
Great, thanks, Anna. Another question that came in as well was also how to deal with not giving too much personal information, self-disclosure, when callers call our helplines, and I suppose in particular our gender identity family support line, like that would be run by volunteers who have family members who have transitioned. So I suppose it's a really good question to actually look at, you know, what we can do as volunteers to ensure that we don't kind of overshare too much information, personal information, when talking to callers. Jackie, is that something you'd come up against on Childline?
We do, and again, it's another boundary push. I know you'd be sick of hearing me say the word boundaries, but it is. So we don't talk about any personal stuff as in relation to the volunteer or the facilitator. And we, like at the beginning of any call that comes to Childline, we explain that. So this call is about the child, it's about you. We don't talk about anything. We do get children who will say they'll want to know your name, or they'll go, well, I've given you we go by nicknames. I've given you a nickname. Can you not give me a name? And we will provide a nickname, but we're just very strong on that from the beginning. And anytime they ask, even if they ask, oh, did you watch Love Island last night or something, you know, we'd be very careful, just throw it back to them and just say, well, you know, we don't talk about ourselves here in Childline. This call is about you. Did you watch Love Island? What was that like for you? You know, and reframe it and rephrase it for them. But yeah, we're very strong, and that's one boundary. It's to protect the volunteer and the facilitator, but also for the child. The child knows that this is their call. You know, and it's about them. And this is the one space in their life that it is just about them.
Yeah.
You know, and about their feelings. And I think that's really invaluable to give to anyone. And I think the Samaritans are very similar in that practice too, you know, and to give that space to people. And you phrased it really well earlier on, and I remember I should have taken it down. But yeah, it's just, yeah, exactly, just having that moment just to sit in your feelings and your things, and have somebody there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think it's back to that boundary thing and owning the call. I think it's back to that theme of owning the call as well, isn't it? That and I always feel that too, like as soon as you start talking about yourself, you know, you're thinking about yourself and you're not thinking about the caller. So and it's almost automatic. So I think from that point of view too, it's really important, you know, to continue to own the call and to be aware of that, and not you know, I suppose you can think about your own experience where it helps in terms of empathy, but it's important not
but I think it helps as well to be a good listener, as such as in you're not trying to think, what am I going to say now? You know, that it takes that out of the equation. So you're just actually hearing what the child or the caller is saying, if that makes sense, you know, because your human instinct to think, you know, what am I going to reply with? What's you're thinking about your sentence rather than actually hearing the sentence that's coming from the caller.
Yeah. And it's amazing how your sense of listening completely changes then when you do talk about yourself. We're just coming up, I suppose, towards the end. I think that's all the questions covered. Like, as well as the LGBT helpline, we would also have the gender identity family support line, which Rena coordinates. And I suppose that's a much more maybe a lived experience for those volunteers in terms of being parents of children who've transitioned or family members who've transitioned. So I think it's probably more important for them to kind of to be aware of that too. Rena, do you have any remarks on that? Or
there's quite a lot of information and signposting required. So they're at the beginning of a journey and they have a lot of questions. I haven't really found that they ask personal questions that much, but they're very pleased to know that you've gone through an experience. And yes, I have got a trans child, but you don't need to say anything more, because after that, you turn it back and say, but everybody's journey is so individual, and this is about you and how are you today, and you just have to move on because it is about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. Like, it's important to kind of mention, and we would kind of mention that, you know, all of our volunteers would identify as LGBT, and I suppose it gives the caller that sense of, you know, you have a sense of what they're going through, but obviously not making it about the volunteer.
Provides a safe space to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I think just in terms of time, we're coming towards the end of that session. So I'd like to really extend huge thanks to Anne and Jackie. I think that was really, really helpful session, and so brilliant to get your insights from the services that you run. So thank you so much to you both for coming today. We really appreciate it, and I think it was really, really great session. I think because we, you know, it's about what we're doing, why we're here, why we volunteer. So it was great to have that insight. Do you want to give a couple of closing remarks?
Thanks for having me. It was actually really lovely to be a part of it, and to celebrate your 10 years with you. It's a bit of an honour, actually, in fairness, to be asked. And it was great. And you're all doing great work. Everything, it's amazing, really, you know. And don't undermine, not undermine is the wrong word, but yeah, you are doing powerful work and you are making a difference. So just always try and remember that.
Thanks, Jackie. Thank you.
All right.
And yeah, I can only reiterate what Jackie's saying. Absolutely delighted to have been invited. I hope it was worthwhile for ye to hear, you know, the two of us talk. Many, many congratulations on the 10 years. Here's to another 10. Unfortunately, you know, unfortunately, we all want to be out of business, but it ain't happening for Samaritans or for Childline or for LGBT. So, you know, that we continue to all work together for that person who needs us. And it was an absolute pleasure to be on today. So thank you so much.
Brilliant.
Enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you very much to you both. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate
Take care.
it. Much love.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Jackie.
Bye.